So go ahead.
Okay, our speaker today is Mr. Wesley Bell. Mr. Bell is the St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney. Mr. Bell was elected in 2018 and has served as prosecutor for 2 3/4 years. Some of you may have read recent headlines about Kimberly Gardner. She is a St. Louis City prosecutor. And let me point out that the St. Louis City prosecutor and the St. Louis County prosecutor are totally separate offices. Okay, just a few words about Mr. Bell's background. He has a law degree from the University of Missouri in Columbia. Prior to his election as prosecutor, he was served time as a public defender, was in private legal practice, was a municipal judge, and was elected to the city council in the city of Ferguson. As a member of the city council, he worked to implement the consent decree from the Federal Department of Justice to reform Ferguson's legal system. His title for these sessions is Justice for All. At this point, I will turn it over to Prosecutor Bell.
Good morning. I was told that I could take my mask off while I was up here so that I can speak. I'm vaccinated, so. But it is good to see you all today. You know, I always say the one thing that I've learned in this job, and I didn't realize it was 2 years and I guess 3/4. Yeah, we're getting up there now. Do I need to speak?
I know, I just want to turn this
okay.
So they can see it. There you go.
Gotcha. I don't like that shot out to you. No, you know, one thing that I've learned about this job, and yeah, I've had a lot of experience in the criminal justice field, as was stated before, but you know, there's certain things you're only going to learn once you're on the job. And one thing that I can say is that there are good parts of it, and there's the other side of it. Because unfortunately, no matter how good you might feel, man, it's Thursday and it's been a great week. We've been able to do some great things. Well, guess what? Friday's coming, and there are never good facts in this job. When things are brought to our office, you know, oftentimes a law was broken. Someone was victimized, and you know, hopefully it wasn't something serious, but you know, it's just rarely good facts. And so I take this job seriously because it is a serious job. You're not going to see me in Twitter wars and, you know, saying crazy stuff on social media, because I understand that even more so with respect to other elected positions, you know, I don't see one that's more serious, you know, as far as this job, because we're dealing with victims and victims' families and things of that nature. So I just want to make sure that when I do have these opportunities to speak, that I communicate that I recognize the seriousness of it. But I will say on the bright side are these types of gatherings, if you will. Gotcha. There are these types of gatherings where I get a chance to talk in intimate settings and not only talk about some of the things that we're doing, but also get to hear questions that you all might have. Because sometimes I get asked to come and give a speech, for example, and they say, well, these are the things we want to talk about. So I'll talk about those things just to find out later that everyone wanted to hear about something completely different. So I'm going to talk about a few things, and then we're going to open it up for questions and answers. And again, my position is ask whatever you want. I have a guiding principle that I don't do anything that I can't defend or explain. And so it does not bother me if you perceive it as a tough question, please ask it. You may not like the answer, but I'll give you but I'll be honest with you. And I'll give you the answer that I'll give you. I'll be as honest as I possibly can. And so there are a few things that my understanding, from my understanding that you wanted to talk about, and I'm going to talk about those things briefly. But again, once I'm done, if you want to talk about the state of dog catchers, we can talk about whatever you want when whoever asks the question. So, and so first and foremost, I did want to take an opportunity to introduce some of our team. And so Captain Clay Farmer, raise your hand, Captain Farmer. He is not only our head of security, but he is also our community engagement director. And that's a new thing at this office. And he and I had been working together prior to this, just on volunteerism and things of that nature. One of the things that is near and dear to our heart is that need to bridge the gap between young people, particularly in certain communities, with law enforcement, because we understand that there are tensions in many communities. And so we had been working on those community policing initiatives, one of which was the police simulator. You may have heard of those. You may have even participated. It's where it's something that officers train on. It's a kind of a virtual video game, if you will, and you are in the position of an officer. Matter of fact, it's similar to this because there's a piece of equipment that is right there in the center of the room. It projects to a room, but it's interactive. So you're there making a decision, and Captain Farmer is back there controlling it, and he can make it do whatever he wants to do. He can be vindictive sometimes. So I just want to put that out there. But it's fun because you have to engage with the subject in a particular scenario. And if you're not doing it right, then he can make that subject respond violently. Obviously, it's a video game, so you don't have to worry about getting hurt, or he can make it go in a different way. And so we've been able to partner with one of the local police departments that lets us use that piece of equipment free of charge. And we bring in groups free of charge so that we can not only give you an opportunity to participate in on that simulator, but also we have officers that help facilitate. And so it's an opportunity to have conversations when you're not getting pulled over or not getting arrested in an intimate kind of situation, kind of like this. And it's been very popular. And I'll say this, it's not just for you all, the members of the community, to get a chance to talk to police in a non-confrontational setting. It's also an opportunity for officers to meet with members of the community, to start making that connection. And so we try and get officers from all different departments to come in and help and co-facilitate. But it's a mutual, it's beneficial, it's mutually beneficial, if you will. And so that's one of the things that we've been doing. Our community case review is similar to this. We invite groups to the office and give them an opportunity to see what our office does. We walk them through cases and then we open it up for questions. Similar, just like this type of situation. And what we found is that because there's so much unknown, that blue curtain, if you will, in the criminal justice system, people really appreciate when they get an opportunity to see exactly what we do, ask questions. And that's one of the reasons I'm excited to be here today. It's another opportunity to do that. Taylor Bush is my assistant, but she's also on our community engagement team as well. If you follow us on social media, we try to show, like in your math test back in school, and they tell you got to show your work. We want to show the stuff that we're doing in the community. And so I would say 90% of the pictures that you see, Taylor's the one that's taking those pictures. So these two and several others on our team stay very busy. But I think it's important work to be visible. And I think that's important for elected officials to be accountable, to be transparent, which is one of the reasons we're here today. So there's a couple things that I was going to talk about before we do get to questions. And one of those things are the bail system in general. And my understanding that is something that that many in this room are curious about, if you will. And so I want to first talk about something that a lot of people may not realize, and that's important to know. Bail, so first of all, we know what bail is. Someone is charged with a crime, and bail is set to ensure that that individual is present throughout the entire course of the criminal justice process through trial. That's what bail is for. It is not for punishment. And sometimes you'll hear people say, well, that person's charged with a serious crime. We need to give them a high bond. But that's not what bond is for. It's not to punish them. And I want to be clear on that. It is only to ensure that the individual appears throughout the process. Now, there's factors that a judge takes into consideration when setting that bond. Is this person a threat to the community? If that person is a threat to the community, then that is a reason for a high bond or no bond, where the judge says, I'm not setting the bond. You're going to sit there until we get through this entire process. So when you'll see someone charged with murder, you are oftentimes likely to see a very high bond or no bond at all, because that person is potentially a threat to the community. One of the other factors is flight risk. If that individual is a flight risk, that's another reason to raise that bond. So you see where I'm going with that. So, but part of the problem that we have is that the efficacy of the bond has started to go in a different direction than it was intended to. And I'll say that diplomatically. So what we've seen is that too often, as a default, a bond will just be put on a case. And so I'll give you an example. We're not talking about a murderer. Let's talk about a possession charge. Let's talk about like possession of a small amount of marijuana, not a drug dealer, just a small amount of marijuana. And I'm gonna use a quick anecdote. So I have two boys, and when I think about my son's safety, I'm not really worried about the person with a small amount of marijuana. I'm worried about the guy with the big gun, right? So when we talk about things such as threat to the community, it's a stretch to say this person with a small amount of marijuana is a threat or a danger to the community. But over the past probably 20 or 30 years, as we ramped up this quote unquote war on drugs, we started to default saying, you know what, we're going to put, let's say, a $10,000 bond on a marijuana possession. Now, let's say you make that 10% or what have you, that's still $1,000. And so in judges' minds, oh, that's not too much compared to the $200,000 bond on this murder. The problem is that it is a problem for a lot of people. There's a lot of people who can't afford that $1,000. I know when I was in college, fortunately, I never had this situation, but when I was in college, if you would have put me in jail and said, just pay $1,000, you'll be okay, I didn't have it. And so, yeah, I guess I'm moving around. I'm sorry about that. I'll try to remember to stay. I don't know if I'm supposed to be sitting. Okay, all right. There we go. People watching, I'll do my best. And so, yeah, I didn't have that. And there's a lot of people who don't. And there's some collateral consequences that go with that. Let's think about this. If you have a job, most people don't have a job where if you just don't show up for a few days, few weeks, or sometimes a few months, that job's just gonna be waiting for you, right? Most people don't have that. So people lose their jobs. And there is a direct correlation between people who are unemployed and higher crime rates. Let's talk about the rent. Some of us are rent, or if you own. My mortgage company, if I just say, hey, I was locked up for a few months, we okay? No, that's not gonna work. You're gonna lose your housing. And let's talk about that single mom, that single parent who doesn't have the support that many of us do. If that would have happened to me, I was fortunate. I had parents who would have taken my sons. I would have been fine for however long. But a lot of people don't have those situations. They don't have that. So they could lose their families. And so all of those things correlate with higher crime rates. So if we're talking about public safety, which at the end of the day, this is supposed to be about, then locking up low-level nonviolent offenders does not contribute to public safety. As a matter of fact, it takes us in the opposite direction, because what data shows is that staying in jail increases the likelihood that you're going to reoffend. And some people think, okay, well, if you're in there for a few years is what I'm talking about. No, the data shows if you're in jail for 3 days, you are 40% more likely to come back on another charge. If you're in jail for 4 days, you're 50% more likely to come back on another charge. So we're not talking about long-term stays. Short-term stays contribute to those types of those recidivism rates, if you will. And so one thing that we did on day one, and I'll tell you this, a good friend of mine who is a prosecutor, not in the city, but a good friend of mine said, hey, Wes, when you're coming in, don't go too fast with some of the things, kind of ease your way in. And so on day one, we released our reforms. And the reason why we did that is because we knew that there were people who were in jail that needed to be there, and that's fine. But there were people who didn't have any business being in jail. And we didn't want them to have to stay in jail 1 day or 3 days or 4 days longer than they had to. And so we wanted to make certain that it was important that we sent the message early that, hey, there's things that we're going to do and there's things that we're going to change. And my philosophy is pretty straightforward. The first thing is, with violent and serious offenders, we're going to be aggressive and we're going to hold them accountable. And we hired a data analyst, just like our community engagement director, the data analyst. That was a new thing that had never been in the office. And the reason behind that is that if you are not tracking the data, if you're not following the data, you don't know if what you're saying is accurate. You don't know if your policies are doing what they're supposed to do. So it was important for us to be able to track that data. And so when I pulled that data for this conversation, what we looked at is domestic violence cases. We've referred from law enforcement. We get referrals, and we've been referred about the same amount, but we've prosecuted 30% more. With homicides, we've got a few more in St. Louis County, which is unfortunate, but we've prosecuted 42% more, and assaults, we've prosecuted 90% more. So with the violent and serious crimes, we're going to be aggressive. And that's something that we work with law enforcement when appropriate. But on those low level, nonviolent offenses, where individuals just need help, they might need substance use disorder treatment. They might need mental health care, which we know is huge in the criminal justice field. We want to give those people the second chances that they need. Because what we know is not only is it just the right thing to do, because if you look someone up with a drug problem, they're going to come out with a worse drug problem. And they're going to start cycling up to the more serious and violent offenses per that cycle of incarceration. You lock someone up with a mental health issue, they're going to come out with a worse mental health and you're going to exacerbate the problem. And so, as we know, what data also shows is that those who are inclined to do violent crime, they don't start there. They start at the low level stuff. They start at the drug issues, undiagnosed mental health issues. And then we start that cycle of incarceration and they graduate, if you will, to the violent stuff. So we're trying to catch them down here. We're trying to catch them at the low level phase, because we know when we get them the help that they need, they're significantly less likely to reoffend. Well, how do you know that, Wesley? I'm going to answer that question because we have the data to back it up. So when we started our diversion program, because there's two sides of diversion. There's the treatment courts, which are supervised by the judge, but that means you have to go into these treatment courts. That means you have to plead guilty. And some people are not to the point where they need that. There's some people who have picked up their first drug case and they just need some help. Or sometimes you got an 18-year-old kid. I'll give you a perfect example. We had an 18-year-old kid. His crime was he took the golf cart in his neighborhood, rode around and brought it back. This case was charged in 2018 prior to us as a theft. This kid was in high school. If it would have stayed on that track, he wouldn't have graduated. We caught it. When we came into office, we caught it. We put him in our diversion program. He graduated from high school. He's in college. And so those are examples of sea changes that actually help people keep us safer. And so when we expanded our diversion program, we started keeping track of it. And so currently, either being evaluated, treated, or successfully completed our program, there's a bucket of people of about 1,135 as of last week. And of those 1,135 people, our recidivism rate, and before I say this, because I want to set this up, across the state of Missouri, the recidivism rates are about 40 to 45%. That means 4 to 5 people who get out of prison are going to reoffend and be rearrested and be back. And that often means, unfortunately, another victim. And that's 1 year out. Now you add years out, recidivism rates across the country grow to 80%. So that's a problem. So we know jail is not where people find, you know, the light switch comes on and they just never do it again. No, that's not what happens. It's the opposite, actually. So of that 1,100 people that we are either we were evaluating, treating, or successfully completed, we're talking 8% recidivism rate. So we're talking 92 to 93% success rate. And again, I'm not taking credit like I reinvented the wheel. We studied what other jurisdictions are doing. We studied what the research shows, and it shows that when you give people the support that they need, they succeed, period, point blank. So we created a diversion advisory committee because what we recognize is, and now this is something I'm really proud of, is that what we recognize is, and something that's in St. Louis County that is nowhere else as of when we came into the office, hopefully maybe there's some other places doing it now, is that we created that advisory committee because we recognize that there's a lot of people who need to be connected to resources that are just not being connected. And so one of the first individuals we spoke with was Affinia Healthcare. They have grant funding where they are literally looking for those individuals who need substance use treatment, and we know how many people that, and when we look at the opiate epidemic, we know how rampant that is in our community. The problem is people who are struggling with this don't oftentimes raise their hand and say, please help me out. That's just not the nature of substance use disorder. But when we get them, we have a captive audience, if you will. We have that carrot and the stick where we can say, okay, if you complete this program, we won't charge you. And so when we have an organization like Affinia who earmarks beds for us, doesn't cost taxpayers any extra money because they are already looking for these individuals, we can say, Judge, we can send this person over here and get them the treatment they need. Low-level nonviolent offenders, obviously not violent. And so now we can start sending these people and getting them the help they need. And that's, and that is, and let me not stop there. Mental health, we know that 50 to 60% of individuals who come into the justice system are struggling, are in need of mental health care. And we have places for people and a couple of other organizations that can help give them the mental health care. But we didn't stop there. We also know that if you don't have housing, you are more likely to relapse. And so we've gotten organizations that can connect people with affordable housing. We know that if you need a job and you don't have one, you're more likely to relapse. So we got organizations that can help connect, like High C, they're a factory. They start at $12, $13 an hour. That's not gonna, you're not gonna retire on it right now, but they also have full health care. And so these individuals can get a job, they can get that resume built up and have healthcare in the meantime. So we have them as part of it because we know if you don't have a job, you're more likely to relapse. And so so we're trying to be holistic with our approach because you can't, it's not a one size cookie cutter, one size fits all, I should say. And so that's why that's been important to us, is because we want to make sure we have the organizations at the table so that when an individual needs help, that they can get it and they can get it holistically, because that's just the way you got to approach people. We're not all the same. We don't have all the same needs. And so that's been one of the things that we've been focusing on. And so back to the bail system. So what we find is that a judge, and how are we doing on timing? Okay, so one thing that we find with the judge is that one thing that we find with a judge is that sometimes a judge is sitting looking at a defendant, and maybe this defendant hasn't done anything serious to the point where you want to lock them up, but they might have some mental health issues where the judge is like, I know what's going to happen if I let this guy out, he's going to reoffend. And so oftentimes in that conundrum, judges will say, I'm going to just lock them up and then we'll evaluate them later. But now that we have those options, we can say, judge, you don't have to do that. We got a place, we have a bed ready for them where they can get the treatment that they need. And so those help us and bring down, because what we know is that with mass incarceration, we're talking about 500,000 people in the US are currently detained pre-trial. So when we talk about mass incarceration, a big part of it is pre-trial detention. And so that's why we're really proud of those jail population numbers, that we decreased the jail, that we went in looking to decrease the jail population. And we've done that by now 20%. Pre-pandemic, we had got it down to a 30% reduction, but the pandemic has just caused all sorts of logistical problems because we can't move cases. But now that we're starting to open back up, that number is going back down. And it's not, and what we're talking about is it's reduced for non-violent low-level offenders. So your C, D, and E felonies, they tend to be your low-level offenses. They generally don't have victims. And if they do, we separate those. But C, D, and E felonies tend to be your less serious felonies. A and B's are your serious ones. So for example, homicide is an A felony. So of the jail population, 85% are homicide, robbery, burglary, sex offenses. We're talking close to 85 to 90% are those category of crimes. And then you got like 6.6% now, which was much higher when we came in. 6.6%, excuse me, are the low-level offenses. And keep in mind, those include probation violations, which we don't have control of. And sometimes it's appropriate when someone is violating their probation. And some of those they might be a low-level offender, but they continue to offend. And so the judge finally said, look, you're gonna have to sit down. But we're talking 6.6%. So and I say that to bring home the point that the people that are in jail are there because they need to be there, the serious and violent offenders. And what we've done is this what we call is our PRT, our population review team. We meet weekly, and the jail gives us 10 to 15 individuals who are charged with the C, D, and E felonies to make sure they're supposed to be there. And so we review those weekly, and then quarterly, our office does a comprehensive review of the jail population, because we want to make sure that no one slipped under the cracks and is there and shouldn't be. And so that's important because, again, we want to make sure that the people are in there supposed to be in there. And so back to the bail system in general. So one of the issues that we have with the bail system is that we have people who, where was I going with this? So we have people in our bail system who not only necessarily can't afford to pay, but it's when we're looking at our mass incarceration, we also have to look at how did they get there. And so when we look at how they got there, we have to look at, and I'm trying to say this diplomatically. So sometimes, and again, my father is a retired police officer. Listen, toughest job in the world. But sometimes we get people arrested, and the default is, well, let's just get them to jail and lock them up. And that's not, and I want to be fair to law enforcement, it's not their fault. Oftentimes, what we have is we have a society that has decreased the funding for mental health resources for over a generation. We've decreased our resources for healthcare in general, but substance use disorder. And so when someone is having an episode, for example, well, guess what? What are officers going to do with them? They don't have any place to take them because we've closed most of our mental health facilities. We don't have a whole lot of substance use treatment facilities with the adequate funding, so they're limited, so they take them to jail. And so now there's a bond set. And one of the things that we changed on day one is instead of issuing a warrant, because with a warrant, you got to go to jail. It may be for a few hours, it may be for a few days, and sometimes longer, but you got to go to jail. So if you have a traffic ticket that goes to warrant and it's an unincorporated, and the St. Louis County Police Department or officer pulls you over, he has discretion to lock you up. And if he locks you up, you're going to get a bond posted, but you're going to get processed, and you're going to at least be in there for a few hours. And so, and again, that can be longer. So what we did, one of the changes that we made is for the nonviolent CD&E felonies and misdemeanors, we issue summons. And we told all the departments, issue a summons. It's like a ticket. So now you get a ticket, you don't have to go anywhere. I mean, you don't have to get locked up, and then you come to court. So for the low-level nonviolent stuff, and we started having officers issue summons, and what that does is that number, that pretrial detention, that pretrial detention number, it's gone down. That's contributed to that 20 to 30% reduction. Is that now we're not sending those individuals to jail just because they got arrested on some minor case. And that's also one of the things that has been a change in helping get those numbers down with the bail system, bond system, et cetera. I know that you wanted me to also talk about, and I'm going to say how are we doing?
20 minutes.
Oh, okay, that's easy. Okay, so I was going to talk about police unions. I think that might have been something that many people want to talk about. So before I touch upon that, I did want to talk about some of the other things that we've done. The LEAD program, which is the law enforcement assistant diversion program, that was a bond that we applied for. And that was a change in this office. Our office had never applied for any bonds, and applied for grants, the law enforcement assisted diversion grant. That's something our office had never applied. Our office had never applied for grants, period. And those can be very valuable in getting us resources and starting us getting on to initiatives that we wouldn't otherwise. And what that is a program, a pilot program, where we work with law enforcement to train them to look at alternatives to incarceration for those low-level nonviolent offenses. And so we had 2 departments that volunteered to be a part of our pilot program, which was the St. Louis County, but the Jennings precinct, but also Afton. And we wanted to have some diversity with that. And so what that does is that we get officers who now recognize, okay, this person has a mental health issue. We have social workers that work in our office, and they work, they talk together. And so, okay, this individual, okay, let's get them over here to this mental health treatment facility as opposed to locking them up. And that's a partnership with those departments that now we're getting more departments who want to work with us, which I think is a good thing. And so that's another thing that we've done with our diversion program. Also, we created a conviction incident review unit, and that unit does 2 things. One, it does all investigations of potential incredible wrongful convictions. And so you may have heard of one that was in the paper, an individual who had been incarcerated for 20 years. When we came into office, we received an update on it, and what it determined, and the Supreme Court agreed with us, was that this individual was wrongfully convicted. A prosecutor 20 years ago, and again, the prosecutor told a witness to lie, and that's one of the biggest no-nos you can do. And this was not in dispute. Told the witness, who said she saw 2 cars, which means that 2 separate individuals could have done it. Told them to say no, you only saw 1 car, which was the defendant's car. And that individual did 20 years in prison, and that person is now free. Because we went through that process, and our unit participated with some other community stakeholders, and that individual is out. And again, our office is not about just winning or locking people up. We take an oath to bring justice, and whatever that looks like. And if it looks like someone who has committed a serious crime and needs to be incarcerated, that's what we're going to do. But if it looks like someone who was wrongfully convicted, then we're going to advocate to get that individual out. And so that's one of the things that office does. The second thing is investigates any allegations of police misconduct. And the reason we needed to have a specialized unit is that, you know, when you're a prosecutor or a line prosecutor, you work with police officers all the time. They become friends. You get to know them. You know, I can say that with Captain Farmer is that I've gotten to know him. He's a bad example because I don't like him at all. No, but I'm joking. But you get to know these people and they're your friends. And so if you tell me Captain Farmer did this terrible deed, I'm just not going to believe it because he's a friend of mine. And so we wanted to have a walled off unit that doesn't have those same interactions, that can just objectively look at those cases. And if, and I'll say this until the cows come home. If an officer is in the right, we are going to support them 120%, period. And if they're wrong, we're going to hold them accountable. And just like any of us, I think that's all we would ask individually is that, hey, if we're wrong, okay, so be it. But if we're right, stand by us. And so with that unit, it was important for us. We were going to be tough, but we're going to be fair. And so that means sometimes people aren't going to like, you know, you're never going to make everyone happy. But one thing that I'm going to do is I'm not going to do anything that I can't defend or explain, as I told you. And so, you know, we've had to make some tough calls that some, you know, in the community didn't like, but I'm going to stand up here and tell you why and what the reasoning behind it is. And I'm going to answer questions. And so, but yeah, we have that unit. We're really proud of the work that they're doing. Thus far, last year, we had 84 applications of individuals claiming wrongful conviction. Now, obviously, all of them aren't going to be credible, but of those 84, 83 were submitted by the individual themselves. And I'm proud of that because we wanted to make it accessible to individuals because oftentimes people don't have an attorney, especially people who have been convicted, can't afford it, don't have access to it. So we wanted a process where they could apply to our office directly themselves, and we're seeing that. Now, again, if I'm not mistaken, we have about 20% that we're reviewing that we've deemed credible. So yeah, all of them aren't even some of them we've looked at as like, yeah, right. You know, because it's just, no. But there's some that, you know, there's some that are at least worthy, that they've at least brought up enough that is worthy of giving a second thought or second look into. And then there's some that we're like, hey, there's some real issues here. But I think it's important that that direct channel is open so that individuals can apply to us directly. Captain Farmer, before I start going into the last part of this, is there anything else I should talk about? Captain Farmer is always with me. Okay. I will talk about that. I'm sorry. So on that line of bridging the gap between law enforcement, we started, one of the things that we worked on with the police simulators, we would adopt families at Christmas. And there was one young lady who, she had 5 kids. She had gotten in a really bad car accident, so totaled her car and almost died. I mean, it was rough go of it. And you know, St. Louis is hard to get around without a car. You know, we don't have the best public safety. I'm above public transportation. I mean, I hope we have some of the best public safety. And so, you know, we adopted that family, and I can say that along with officers who worked with us, because it started with us, but we got officers on board too, because it's about bridging that gap. And so, I mean, literally, like I've been fortunate, like I've had some really good Christmases as a kid growing up, but what I saw, what we were able to do for this family, I mean, every kid had a stack of presents taller than them. And then also Captain Farmer found a car dealership who had heard about what we were doing And so after the kids got to open their presents up, we walked them outside. We were like, hey, we want to take some pictures. Let's take some pictures. And then she sees her car out there with the ball on that. And so, and you know, and with officers there. So there's some young kids who are saying, hey, we've got some good experiences with officers. And we have some officers who are saying, hey, maybe everybody's not a bad person. You know, maybe there's some good people out here. Maybe that connection is important. And so from that sprung something we created called Humanity in the Middle. And it is along those same lines of trying to bridge that gap. And so we take, this is the fifth year, but fourth trip, we had to cancel last year because of the pandemic. And so we take about anywhere from 15 to 25 high school students on trips, visit colleges, historical sites. And so this year we took them to Tulsa, Oklahoma. They got to visit the new chief down there. They got to visit many of the historical sites of the school, colleges down there. And police officers and law enforcement members are chaperones. And again, and let me make sure I'm saying this correctly. I guess we're Creve Coeur. Creve Coeur has the right to have good policing. Chesterfield has the right to have good policing. God bless them. But they're not the same types of problems that we're seeing in communities like Weston or Pine Lawn and those kind of tensions. So I want to be clear. I'm not saying that one deserves good policing and one doesn't. What I'm saying is that we've made an emphasis to target those quote unquote at-risk communities because that's where the tension is most salient, if you will. And so the people that the kids that we've primarily targeted for this program are in those areas and haven't had good relationships or even know an officer. And so what I'm really proud of is that when we take those kids and we get a chance to debrief with law enforcement, what you're hearing is, you know what, the only stories that I've heard about law enforcement are bad. But now I'm getting to know, now I can say I have friends that are law enforcement. And we're hearing the same thing from some of our law enforcement chaperones. They're seeing these young people not just as troublemakers or oh, this kid is from this bad area. They're seeing the humanity of these young people. And so we are, you know, I think, hey, if you do some community engagement in Chesterfield, that's fine. And I mean that's fine. But if you really want to make gains in bridging that gap, you got to go into the fire. You got to go to where where those tensions are the highest. And I just think that's important. And so, you know, we speak in West County, we're in South County. No, we're going to go anywhere that anyone wants to hear from us. But we do recognize that those are where the tensions are highest. So we try to go into those areas and bring officers from Chesterfield, Town and Country into those areas so that we can all start working together as one community. Because I think that's just so important. So, and then so last, police unions. And so that, you know, that, and I'm going to start by saying this, you know, I'm a supporter of unions. I think you have a right to organize. And, you know, we look at having weekends off, that's because of unions. We look at a number of things, healthcare, there's a lot of things that unions have done. But then you have the police unions, which I believe, in my humble opinion, do not do a good job for law enforcement from a marketing standpoint. You know, what other union do you see constantly posting on social media, attacking people, making offensive statements about people? You don't see that in other unions, in the labor union or in the pipe fitters union. But you see that, and not all, let me be clear. I don't see that as often in St. Louis County's union, but, you know, to be honest, we have seen a lot of that stuff in the St. Louis City Union, and it doesn't help build that trust that you need for law enforcement, with law enforcement. And that's one thing that I'm big on, is that we know that there is a deficit of trust with the criminal justice system in general. And so that's why it was important for us to create a community engagement team so that we could start being available, being visible, being transparent so that you can ask these questions, because this is how trust is built. When you get to hear from us and we get to talk, and hopefully I say something you agree with, that's how trust is built. And so, you know, and so that's one thing that I would say, because I know a lot of officers and most of them get in the job for the right reasons. But when you have, when you're trying to overcome generations and generations of mistrust, because, you know, one time I was giving a speech and I was talking about rebuilding the trust between many communities and law enforcement. And it kind of hit me like, no, the word is not rebuild, it's built. There's a lot of communities where there's never been a good relationship. I mean, we can go back to the beginnings of American policing, the slave patrols. We can look at all those things. There are communities where there has never been a good relationship. And so if we're gonna build a relationship, we also gotta look at how we represent ourselves and the messages that we send out to the public. And I think that there are a lot of police unions specifically that do not help build that trust with law enforcement. And I think I do not think it's a good thing, because I know so many officers, again, who do it for the right reasons. Now, again, we know that there's, in any industry, you're going to have people who do a bad job, right? That's just, you get a plumber, you get, hopefully not a prosecutor, but any job, you're going to have people who do it well and some who don't. Policing is no different. You're going to have people who don't do a good job. And so we got to have ways, safeguards, to be able to address those issues, but also the messages that many of you hear are from the police unions. And when you have attacks, whether, you know, when you have those offensive attacks and things of that nature, it doesn't help at all. And so there are some data points that kind of reiterate some of what I'm saying. And so a 2006 report from the FBI, I'm sorry, not the FBI, but the Federal Bureau of Justice Statistics found that unionized police agencies garnered 9.9 use of force complaints for every 100 officers, compared with 7.3 for non-unionized agencies. During the disciplinary process, about 7% of those complaints were sustained or found to have merit in unionized agencies. But in non-union agencies, the sustained rate was more than double at 15%. So in effect, officers in unionized police forces are more likely to be the subjects of an excessive force complaint, but more likely to beat the allegations in disciplinary hearings. So there's two sides of that. One, you could say, well, that means they're getting better representation. The other side of it is, it appears that they are not being held as accountable as non-unionized police departments. On average, police union contracts have 4 layers of appeals available to officers in disciplinary cases, with some having as many as 6 or 7 layers of review. The result is that a stunningly high number of officers fired for misconduct are eventually rehired after lengthy appeals. In Philadelphia, it was like 62%. In Philadelphia, in San Antonio, it was like 70%. And so, you know, again, I want to be clear. You know, I think that the right to organize, I think that's important. I think that our history reflects that there's been a lot of gains that we all enjoy as a result of unions. Let me be clear on that. But we are separating and having a separate conversation about police unions. And my biggest thing is that I want them to represent officers better. I want them to do a more effective job, and that means also the public, that public face, that the messages, the marketing, again, if you will. I think they need to do a much better job. And some of that is officers saying, hey, look, we need better representation in some ways. So I don't know if there's any more specifics about that subject, or
Unfortunately,
there we go. See, right on time. And you didn't even have to get up and start giving me the hook.
So I thank you very much for coming and being with us and sharing us all this information. I am very glad you're coming back on October 24th to meet with us again. And then hopefully we can have some question and answers then at that time. So.
You mean I went, you should have told me. I thought we were going to do questions.
I'm sorry, this whole time.
I'm so sorry.
Anyway, thank you so much.
Next time, I'm going to talk for like 5 minutes and just completely open it up for questions. I thought you were going to tell me when. Sorry. But can I hang back if anyone has any?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm here if anyone wants to just ask questions on the side.